Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin.com podcast. This is Zach Doty and I have Gavin here with me, and we'll have an interview shortly coming up with Andreas Antonopoulos. The topic for today is the other 6 billion. We're excited to discuss what Bitcoin holds for the rest of the world and, taking a long-term view at how Bitcoin might help to bring financial inclusion and empowerment to people that don't have that today. So we're going to have a quick introduction to the topic today, and then we'll jump into the interview with Andreas. Gavin, good to have you here. Gavin and I are probably going to be doing a number of episodes together on Bitcoin.com/podcast. Gavin, go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I'm Gavin Knight. I've just been interested in Bitcoin for a long time and got involved in Bitcoin.com. I'm also a mod on the Reddit, where we try to mod as least as possible. So I'm not a Gavin Andreessen, but I'm really excited about this technology as well as Zach, and we're happy to bring you guests as often as we can about all different sort of topics in Bitcoin.
One of the things that's so exciting about Bitcoin is the promise of financial inclusion. Bitcoin is power banking on your cell phone, and it really lets people be their own bank. And it's a theme that Andreas has talked about quite a bit in his various talks. That's going to be the theme for our talk with him. And it's exciting to see how developing countries are almost leapfrogging the financial infrastructure that developed countries have created. Just like they leapfrogged the landline and went straight to the cell phone, they're doing that with financial services and just going straight to, blockchain, Bitcoin technology, and just skipping this whole, fintech, development that's happened over the last, 10 or 20 years in the US. And not that there is much, fintech development outside of Bitcoin right now. We're going to jump into the interview pretty quick here. But Gavin, what do you think about financial inclusion and how Bitcoin plays into that?
Well, on the base level, I think the technology is still too complex as far as the GUI and how people interact with Bitcoin. Most people don't even know how credit cards are processed, and they don't need to. And it's the same way with Bitcoin. As much as we're the people that are the gold miners or the first to find out, the trailblazers, a lot of people just want to use it for the benefits, the security, the way it's cheaper. So a lot of the focus, I think, as we move forward needs to be on how do we make the technology seamless, and how do we bring it forth to people in the third world or places where economies are struggling in a way where it's really easy to use. People like PayPal because it's easy to use. People find Western Union easy to use because they can walk in and write out a note and send it to somebody. So I think the real obstacle, because a lot of places have cell phone networks, a lot of places have internet access, is making that technology seamless, making it something that is in the background and brings forth all of those benefits, but doesn't have all of the educational sort of information that you have to go through just to understand Bitcoin. So on the simplest level, that's what I think we're working towards tackling. While many of those people that are sort of the trailblazers are thinking about the lower level issues, block size, and some of the proposed upgrades to Bitcoin.
Exactly. And it's great to see those low-level upgrades, but I totally agree that the usability and user interface level is really the key to increasing adoption. And also, deploying technology as we're talking about third world countries. It's great to see the internet access expanding into underdeveloped areas with every major initiative that there is right now to bring internet access, internet.org and Project Loon, right? There's a lot of advances in the telecom industry that are going to connect another few billion people over the next few years. We're going to double the number of people on the internet in the next decade or more. All right, well, let's segue into the interview with Andreas Antonopoulos. We're going to be hosting a podcast once a week on Bitcoin.com, and we'll bring you a new interview every week. And this week's interview is with Andreas Antonopoulos. Again, the topic is the other 6 billion.
Bitcoin is about the other 6 billion. Bitcoin is about unbanked and borderless. Bitcoin is disruption. It's disruption on a scale that most people haven't even begun to imagine. And if you think the end result of this will be that everyone will be able to run banking customer service on their smartphone, you're missing the point. A decade from now, a 10-year-old will be able to run the SWIFT network on their smartphone. They'll be able to be a bank and a brokerage house on their smartphone. By the time they're allowed at 16 to open a bank account, they've probably spent 5 or 6 years using Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis as their currency. Bitcoin offers the possibility of bringing banking to feature phones over SMS. There are more people with feature phones and SMS today in the world than people who have access to clean water. Bitcoin can deliver banking services, not by banking the unbanked, but by debanking all of us. There's 1.5 billion people in the world who have power banking, international power banking like I do. And with Bitcoin, we can give that to the other 6 billion.
Hello, Andreas.
Hey, hello.
Hey, great to have you on the podcast at Bitcoin.com. For those who are listening, you can go to Bitcoin.com/podcast to see the podcasts that we have upcoming with other guests. Andreas is our first guest on the show. Great to have you on the show, Andreas.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, and thanks so much for having me as your first guest.
Yeah, so I was just talking to you a little bit before the show got started, and you're working on your book, the second edition of Mastering Bitcoin. So tell us a little bit about what's new and why we should buy the second edition and read about all the new things.
Well, you know, the thing about a book, especially in a space that's moving so fast, is that not a lot of things have changed in the fundamentals, but a lot of new things have come along. So the second edition is an update that covers many of the new developments, from new types of wallets to completely new technologies that were introduced either after the book came out or were not yet mature enough in the first edition of the book. For example, payment channels, or perhaps Lightning Network if it's in a state where it's ready enough at the time, sidechains technology in the first sidechains, and, you know, even segregated witness, which I'm looking at the moment to see. And if that's reached the level of maturity where it can be discussed in the book in detail, that will be added. And of course, the second edition is also an opportunity to improve on the book, fill in some gaps, create some more examples, provide more code, and all of the other things that I simply ran out of time with the first edition.
Wonderful. Great. Yeah, I loved reading the first edition on GitHub, and that would be awesome to catch up with the updates. So I will have to take a look at that again and see what you've written. Segregated witness is interesting, and we've had a soft fork since your first publication. So there's now opt-in replaced by fee and a few other things that merchants should be aware of. So
Yes, I think there have been 3 soft forks since I actually published the book. The first one was, let's see, I think the first one was BIP. It was the tightening up the signature rules. So tightening up some of the malleability rules, which was BIP 34, if I'm not mistaken. And then check lock time verify. And after that, the replace by fee was not done as a soft fork, actually. It's done as a minor option.
Right.
But there's a lot of changes, you know, from relay rules to consensus rules. That is mostly small changes. Of course, segregated witness, or separated signatures, as I like to call it, is a pretty significant change in how the underlying structure work, and that's going to be quite a big chunk. But I think it's going to be interesting to see. Bitcoin is evolving really fast, and lots of exciting things are happening.
I totally agree. I think one of the most exciting metrics that I've seen that points to how fast Bitcoin is developing was the recent chart showing the number of Github commits, Bitcoin versus PayPal, and it's over twice as much as PayPal currently and growing exponentially. So that's just exciting to see the developers embracing open source, embracing this open network, and running with it. And what else have you been involved with recently other than the second edition to the book? I know you've been having fun with your 21 Bitcoin computer, and you know you built the Wi-Fi portal 21. Tell us, do you have any plans for that?
No, that was really just a little prototype. I was just doing a proof of concept. I've been interested in the possibility of sharing Wi-Fi in a mesh network kind of way, and this seemed like a cool application to write as a prototype. That was just kind of a weekend project for fun. I'm continuing to play around with the 21 computer, and that's kind of on the hobby side more so than my work. In terms of work, I'm still teaching the massively open online course for the University of Nicosia. We're about to go into our 5th run of that course. It's the longest run university course on digital currencies, and that starts in late January, beginning of February. We're going to bring a whole new batch of students. Education, I think, is the most important task we have in Bitcoin, and so most of my work is related to that. I'm continuing to do a number of different conferences. So far this year, I think I'm scheduled for Brazil and Switzerland for a couple of conferences. I expect to be doing a lot more conference later in the springtime, as well as various community meetups and things like that. I'm also working on a professional certification standard, Certified Bitcoin Expert, which is kind of a second stage certification after the Certified Bitcoin Professional. These are offered by a nonprofit organization called the Cryptocurrency Certification Consortium, which is a nonprofit organization that's for developing these community standards, really to help people evaluate candidates who are applying for jobs and provide some basic standards as to what it means to know Bitcoin, as well as other things. In fact, we're preparing a certification in Ethereum and some other currencies too. So I'm working on that with a group of volunteers also.
Wow, sounds like a lot of things. Speaking of your massively open online course, though, it sounds like we should tell our listeners where they can attend that course. So what website would you direct them to learn more about that?
Oh, that's a good question. I do not know off the top of my head.
Okay, we can address that later then. So, well, that's a lot that you're working on. The Cryptocurrency Consortium saw something that they were working on recently, and that's great. So maybe switching topics a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the other 6 billion and what you think Bitcoin might hold for them over the next several years.
The other 6 billion is a kind of slogan that I introduced 2 years ago, which is to put the emphasis of Bitcoin where it really needs to be, which is on serving the needs of the vast populations that have no access to banking or very limited access to banking. You know, I think in many cases, because a lot of the development and a lot of business activity in Bitcoin happens in North America and Western Europe, sometimes the focus is way too narrow and depends on a fairly privileged view of finance, which focuses on things like retail shopping. But the truth is that economic inclusion is a very big issue. Very many people around the world have limited or no access to financial services in general, or access to financial networks, the ability to conduct commerce, to trade currencies, to trade across borders, to use other currencies other than their home currency. So whether you look at the unbanked, which the World Bank puts at 2.5 billion people, only counting working adult males, not their families, or you look at a much broader perspective that I take, which is, you know, comparing the kind of first world power banking that I have access to versus the banking most people have access to, which is barely having any checking and savings account or limited to a single currency, can't work across borders, can't receive or send money, can't trade in international markets. You know, bringing international finance to everyone around the world as an internet service, I think is, to me, the most important goal within Bitcoin. I think it's where Bitcoin really shines. And the concept of the other 6 billion encompasses all of that in a single phrase. You know, it's been the focus point for my work from the very beginning.
I completely agree. In fact, you know, I'm working with a startup in London right now. They're a client of mine, and it's just great to see what they're doing as far as financial inclusion. They're working with underprivileged areas, and they're working with mothers who are in dire poverty to bring them advertised subsidized phones for only $1. And I have the privilege of being able to build Bitcoin apps that are going to be preloaded and installed on all of those phones that will also support some remittance functionality, including, you know, fiat conversion in and out of Bitcoin. So it's just exciting to see those phones being deployed. I think they just recently got their first order for 20,000 phones, and those will be deployed with Bitcoin actually locked in as an app that's just locked into that phone and can't be removed even. So it's just really exciting to see some of these developments. What do you think the most important things are that we could work on as developers to bring Bitcoin to the next 6 billion. Are there any projects that you think are going to be killer apps for Bitcoin in the next year that will really increase the adoption?
I think at this point, we're still very much in the early stages where the focus should be on infrastructure, scaling, user experience, and usability, security. We really need to get the basics right. It's too early for killer apps or for broad adoption simply because we don't yet have the necessary infrastructure in order to deploy Bitcoin broadly and to make it usable. You need liquidity for exchanges. You need on-ramps and off-ramps into and out of the Bitcoin world so that people can interact with their local currency as well. You need better applications, better user interfaces, better wallets, better security, and better scaling. All of which, of course, are being worked on by thousands of developers all around the world in many different areas. And we've made enormous progress. Just compared to a year ago, the number of very easy to use mobile wallets, for example, or the level of security, interoperability between systems with things like mnemonic words, with BIP39. All of those improvements will make it a lot easier for new people to come on board with Bitcoin and to try it out with little risk. And more so in communities where you don't have a lot of tech people around, a lot of technical support, a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, and infrastructure. It's easy to find someone who knows how to do Bitcoin in San Francisco. It's not so easy in many other places in the world where you'd have to cobble together things from different sources. The other big thing, I think, is internationalization. And one of the projects I've been focusing on for the past 6 months has been translating content into different languages so that they become accessible to those who don't speak English. Still today, the vast majority of Bitcoin documentation is in English, and that's gradually changing, and I think that's another area where volunteers can make a tremendous impact in the adoption of Bitcoin and bringing new people into the technology and the community, new developers, new startups, new businesses. In the last 3 months, a group of volunteers has finished translating Mastering Bitcoin into Japanese, Hungarian, Korean, German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, a bunch of languages, and there's more efforts continuing to bring these books and the various bits of documentation that exists out there into different languages and make them available.
That's wonderful. And so right now, where do you think that most of the growth in Bitcoin is happening? Do you see a lot of that occurring in some of these other countries?
Not yet. Really, it's still limited to early adopters in the technology space. There are a few glimmers of little pockets of adoption that happen in relation to currency devaluations or currency crisis. There's a few pockets of adoption that are related to remittances. But, it's still mostly concentrated in the Western world, in North America and Western Europe, where you see a greater adoption that's going beyond kind of the really hardcore techies. But, it's moving at an incredible pace. If you look at the trends in innovation and technology and startups and investment, users, transactions, wallets, all of the metrics are increasing at a very rapid pace. So I think Bitcoin is doing extremely well, and over time it's demonstrating kind of how money should be and what the future of money is and how it can be achieved today to more and more people.
Yeah, so Andreas, what can Bitcoiners do around the world? What can they do to increase Bitcoin adoption in their local community as a grassroots activity?
Well, if you think about it, most of the people who come into Bitcoin for pretty much the same reason. It's not because they read the white paper. It's not because they were looking for a specific application, perhaps. As still at this point, the vast majority of new users come into Bitcoin because they have that annoying friend. I am that annoying friend. Many Bitcoiners I know are that annoying friend, that person who won't shut up, that person who will tell everyone they know about Bitcoin and discuss it endlessly and be willing to offer guidance and support and help people set up their first wallet, give them a few millibits for their first transactions, help them make some transactions. Bitcoin is still something that is very much experienced rather than explained, and it's enormously important to be a personal ambassador for Bitcoin. We are all ambassadors for Bitcoin. We are the front line of showing people that Bitcoin is not about drug dealers and terrorists. And the best way to demonstrate that is by meeting someone who is passionate about Bitcoin and who's a dentist, your next door neighbor, a school teacher, your gym coach, and not what the media tries to portray as the average Bitcoin user. And so as ambassadors for Bitcoin, being able to go and tell people about it, to get together, host meetups, for example, I think that's a wonderful forum at meetup.com, get to meet new people, work with other people to do developer hackathons and get together and discuss software development if you're a developer, or design or art or music, or just geek out about Bitcoin and talk about the latest things that are happening, and then help new users by showing them how to get involved and what Bitcoin is and demonstrate its usability. And be there to give a helping hand when things go wrong, and give good advice about how to be smart and back up and use good passwords and not leave your money on exchanges, and all of the best practices that we've learned. Some of us have learned these things the hard way, and maybe we can help someone else learn them a bit easier.
Absolutely. Great suggestions there. Yeah, and the meetup.com, very powerful. Been running one in my local area for a while now, and that's just been great to help people get started with Bitcoin. So,
yeah, by the way, if you go to bitcoin.meetup.com, you can see a list. There are currently, if I'm not mistaken, almost 700 meetups around the world, with more than 130,000 members for Bitcoin.
The other thing I would add to that is if you talk to somebody who takes Bitcoin in their business, they probably haven't taken the effort to add themselves to the Bitcoin business maps, and that's a great thing that you can do. I went through and did that for my local community, and all of a sudden now we have a dot that shows up on the global map because of that. So they were already accepting Bitcoin, they just hadn't listed themselves on CoinMap or Airbits. So yeah, well, that's great. Thank you, Andreas, for joining us on this podcast, the opening podcast at Bitcoin.com. Thank you, Gavin, for helping produce this, and a big thank you to all our listeners. Tune in next week at Bitcoin.com.